Something that we're finally starting to see happen in the economy, which is what I've been kind of telling people to do, is to just start boycotting things that are too expensive. You know, if you're tired of paying too much money for the name brand chips at the store, start buying a different brand. If you're tired of prices at McDonald's, go somewhere else. Or better yet, just eat at home. If you're tired of paying for your streaming service, cancel it and just watch YouTube for free like you are right now. There's a lot of things that people can do to shift their spending habits in order to cut back. And also, that sends these companies a message like, hey, you're charging too much. And I think the same thing is also happening right now in the housing market. You have a lot of buyers who are just stepping back and saying, you know what? We're not buying, it's too unaffordable. Even if I wanted to, I can't do it right now. And that sends a message to sellers and real estate agents that the prices are too high, and if you want us to come back, you need to lower the price. You have a lot of companies right now that are losing business because people just don't want to pay the higher prices. You have companies like Amazon, Disney, Yum Brands. They're all saying that their customers are seeking cheaper alternative products and services right now because people are searching for bargains and everything in this economy is just too expensive right now. You know, we just saw this ridiculous inflation reading come in, and of course, all the Fed, all the government is celebrating this inflation report as if it's some kind of miracle, but yet it just means that prices are still going up 3% year over year. That doesn't mean things are getting cheaper, it just means they're getting more expensive at a slower rate. So companies are now finally starting to realize that they cannot continue raising prices indefinitely like they have been. Home sellers are finding this out the hard way too. And by the way, for anyone who wants to know, I am walking through the boat docks here in Sausalito today. There's like so many docks, I won't even be able to walk through all of them today, so I will definitely come back here again later for another video. But it's really cool to just see how many boats are here, and you can't walk through the marinas like this in Miami. So the fact that you're able to just come out here and walk amongst all these boats without being a member of the marina is super cool. So part of the reason that we're seeing these bogus inflation numbers come down, because a lot of companies have stopped raising their prices, and in fact some of them are even lowering their prices again to lure people back in. Just like Starbucks and McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King, a lot of these fast food places have these artificially low price deals just to get customers back right now. So according to the New York Fed, consumers themselves expect that they're going to increase their spending an additional 4.9% in the coming year. And they're saying, wow, this is great because this is the lowest reading that we've gotten since April of 2021. Well, increasing your spending 5% year over year is still higher than these bogus inflation numbers that we're getting right now at 3%. So if people are expecting to increase their spending by that much, then real world inflation must be higher, right? You know, the Fed is blaming lower inflation on people not spending as much money right now because they're like, well, if people expect prices to come down over the next couple of years and inflation to moderate, then people are not going to be in a hurry to buy stuff. They're not going to have that FOMO mentality. But in reality, there's been a massive amount of job losses lately, and the unemployment numbers have been skyrocketing. So that's going to contribute to people slowing down on spending as well if they don't have a job anymore. I mean, even according to the Fed's Beige Book themselves, all the companies that report in this Beige Book, they all report the same thing. They report, in order to get customers back, we have to lower prices. They're reporting we're seeing a slowdown in the amount of business that we're seeing right now. That's why you're seeing so many layoffs and so many bankruptcies and so many businesses that have been around for 100+ years finally close their doors now in 2024, is because with the rising cost of doing business combined with the lower amount of sales, they just can't hack it anymore. And you got to remember, a lot of these businesses took on a tremendous amount of debt when it was cheap and thrived on that, but now that debt is no longer cheap and a lot of this debt needs to be refinanced or they need more financing, it's no longer feasible for them. Here's another interesting point from this story. It says that most economists say consumers are still spending enough to sustain the economy consistently. Well, if we know that rich people account for 40% of spending in the US economy, then that's actually not a valid point, because you can't have a small percentage of the population doing roughly half the spending and saying that's enough to keep up with things and things are going to be okay for a while. Because that means the majority of people are not spending as much as they should or would be if prices were lower or if they had more disposable income, for example. And I know something a lot of people talk about, I see you guys mention this in the comments all the time. Well, what about corporate greed, Michael? What about the soaring corporate profits? And no doubt they have played their role in this rising inflation and how much we've seen prices of everything go up. But all those companies that took advantage of us for those few years there are starting to have to reverse those policies as well, because they can no longer get away with it. You cannot keep raising prices 5, 10, 15% year over year on items and expect to have the same level of business. They're already feeling that slowdown. So they got away with it for a little while, unfortunately, but now they're no longer able to. Here's the other thing to think about, guys. If it wasn't for all of the free money that was handed out during the pandemic in all sorts of forms, right? You had stimulus checks, there was fraudulent PPP loans and EIDL loans that people cashed in and got all this extra money, right? But think about for a minute, if no one got anything and they never did any of this monetary stimulus, inflation wouldn't even have been allowed to run as rampant as it has, because no one would actually have the extra money for these insane increases in prices. So once again, that just goes back to show you that this whole run-up in inflation is the government's fault. It's the Fed's fault. These guys are in charge of our money supply and our monetary policy, and they tell us that things are great right now when inflation is still too high, yet they're the cause of all of it. If it wasn't for them and their ridiculous bad policies, none of this would be an issue for anybody right now. And interestingly enough, if we look to see what happened after the GFC, we actually saw a similar increase in inflation, although not as high as we saw during this pandemic. But what actually ended up happening is a small run of deflation. We had a time period when we were in this big recession when we had deflation. And we may actually see that again very soon, especially if these inflation numbers continue to come down. You know it's getting bad out there when people have even stopped dating or would rather be single because of how bad inflation is, guys. That's right. I saw a story today talking to someone who's single, and this guy says over the past couple of months, he spent about $2,000 on dating, you know, from things like drinks and food to movie tickets or, you know, event tickets, Uber rides, all sorts of stuff like that. And guess what? After spending this couple of grand, still single. He says a lot of times I'm spending money just to get to know somebody outside of the computer screen. Now this guy's smart and he's wisening up because of how much money he's wasted on dating recently. And he's saying, you know, instead of springing for, you know, an event or pricey drinks at the bar or offering dinner for the first date, now he's like, let's grab a cup of coffee or just meet at a park and go for a walk, which I think is smart, guys, especially when you're first getting to meet somebody. Like, you don't need to drop a couple $100s on a date for someone you don't even know. Maybe you won't even like them in the first 10 minutes that you meet them. Why on earth would you want to spend money on them? You know, maybe a little bit, like I said, cup of coffee or whatever, but really the best thing is the free stuff, right? If you're meeting at a park and just going for a walk, it's a public place, it's safe, right? And on top of that, the way people get to know each other is talking. You know, you don't need to have a drink in your hand to get to know each other. You know, I feel like people do all this because they feel awkward, they feel uncomfortable, and they need to have something else going on in the background in order for them to feel good about meeting somebody new. But in reality, if you really want to meet somebody, then I think you should put yourself out there more in a way that, you know, there doesn't have to be this extra requirement. I don't need to have a drink in my hand. I don't need to have a guy buy me an expensive dinner to prove that he's worthy. And let's face it, at a time when people can barely afford regular life, a lot of people are not able to afford this increased expense as well of dating and taking people out that you don't even know and blowing money on them. Even just wasting money on the dating apps, I think, is a waste of money is in itself, guys. Now, I'm not in the dating world, but I think, you know, the best way to meet anybody is just to meet people organically in the world. Like, I look around and I see people everywhere, okay? So there's places to meet people. I don't know what happened to people just being afraid to go and say hello. Even the professional dating coaches, they recommend that you have a first date as basically a miniature screener date for the first meetup. You know, first date should not be going out to dinner for 4 hours and spending a ton of money. They say it should be something short and sweet. And I think that's smart, you know, like have the expectation that the first date should be like an hour. You know, an hour walk in the park, do I like you? An hour meeting at your local coffee shop, let's grab a coffee together and see if we connect. You know, if not, why bother with all the rest of the dog and pony show? You might as well just move on to the next one if it's not a fit, right? Especially if you meet somebody you like after a few dates, then you're actually gonna want to go out and take that person out to dinner and spend a few hours with them and don't mind dropping a couple $100s on a nice expensive dinner. It's gonna feel good versus like this nerve-wracking experience where I don't even know if I'm gonna like this person, but I'm spending all this money. You know, and some guys especially do stuff like that to try to impress women, but I think that's a bad move, especially with the first date, because, you know, if you feel like you need to impress that much, imagine what you're gonna have to do to top yourself in the future. And what does that say about the woman you're with if you're constantly needing to one-up yourself in order to make yourself look good in front of her? Otherwise, you're worthless. Find someone else. And the worst thing is if you're going into debt over this stuff, that's the worst thing you can possibly do. You watch my videos?
Oh, absolutely.
What's your name, man?
Greg.
Greg?
Yeah.
You working on these houseboats?
This is mine.
Oh, it's yours?
Yeah.
Cool, man.
Retired, just fooling around.
Yeah?
Trying to get in trouble. You're the only guy to come by. So. How you doing? Love the show. I'm glad for the information. Really
yeah, I appreciate you watching.
And I kind of have a sense of, I get the same feeling, and it worries me about my little investments, you know. And
absolutely.
Retired 40 years down there in LA, and came up here and just started fooling with this thing. But yeah, got to keep you on your toes and watch your six. Thanks for the service. I mean,
absolutely, it's my pleasure. I love being out here doing this, you know. I'll be coming back next year for sure.
All right, we'll be looking for you. Come down and say howdy.
Nice to meet you, Greg. Greg, right?
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
Shout out to Greg. Always cool running into the fans of the channel, man. I mean, they have a ton of information here, which I'm not gonna get into like the weeds of this, but basically what they're saying is the cost of dating has risen so much because the cost of doing things has gone up so much. Like, say if you wanna go to a restaurant, obviously that's through the roof now compared to before the pandemic. You wanna go to a museum, that's up tremendously. You know, ticket prices for a live music event, forget it, guys. I mean, it is just so expensive to do all of this stuff now. And then unfortunately you have women, you know, they spend a ton of money on their beauty regimen and things like that to try to look beautiful, to try to land a date, you know, and be attractive to men. And that can be so expensive that they end up, you know, wasting thousands of dollars on that as well, which honestly, even if women end up in a relationship, they're not going to stop doing stuff like that. But you can only afford this stuff for so long before, you know, you really have to prioritize where your money's going. In fact, women that were surveyed in 2023 said they spent over $500 in beauty products in the past year, which honestly sounds cheap. You know, women pay for super expensive things like a full body wax, according to Cosmopolitan, is $152. You know, Botox is a big thing with women. They're spending $300 a pop on these Botox visits. You know, like these things are just extremely expensive that I think most women never used to do any of this stuff, but you know, they put their standards so high these days, whereas if they feel like they don't do it, then somehow they're not going to land anybody, which I don't think is true. But the problem is social media, you see everybody else doing it, and it makes you feel like if you don't do it too, then somehow you're going to be a loser. And let's face it, these dating apps are a ripoff too. You know, they have all these tiers on there in order to try to get you to spend more money in order to land more dates. You know, all this stuff is just designed to get you to spend money, guys. When really the best thing you can be doing is just going out and meeting people organically. If you're meeting people in places you like to frequent, doing things you like to do, that's gonna be your best bet at meeting a compatible match anyways versus some stupid dating app that's robbing you blind. And newsflash, if you're somebody who's spending a lot of money on dating, you're probably gonna be spending even more once you get into a relationship and your dates become more frequent. Maybe you move in together, you start doing things. It's expensive to be with somebody and always going out and doing stuff. Today I just have all sorts of signs that the economy is slowing down. You know, another big one was Home Depot, guys. Home Depot recently announced that people are still not spending the money on the home renovations like they used to. I made a full video about this a few months ago when the CEO came out with their first warning about this, and it's not recovering, you know, and that was like maybe 4 months ago or so I made this video. And one of the biggest reasons of this is because people spend a lot of money on home renovations and repairs with Home Depot, so much money that those repairs and renovations usually need to be financed. And guess what? People are expecting interest rates to come down. They can't afford to do these finance deals at today's rates, so they're hoping that rates will come down enough in the future so they can start financing these repairs and remodelings again. And this is yet another example of how the slow housing market, people not buying homes and higher interest rates, permeates throughout the economy. Like only just now we're seeing a lot of the damage that's being done from these high interest rates. Even once the Fed starts lowering them in September, most likely, this isn't going to reverse this damage anytime soon. Another business recently that's going to be going bankrupt is Lumber Liquidators. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about this already, but the reason I want to bring it up is because it directly relates to the Home Depot story. What is Lumber Liquidators, guys? They are a flooring business. You know, they sell all different types of flooring for the most part. And when do people buy flooring? When they're remodeling houses, okay? And when they have money to spend on these projects, when they can afford to finance these projects. None of which what's happening right now. So it's not a coincidence when you see companies like Lumber Liquidators filing for bankruptcy. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and they're already going to be closing several of their stores while attempting to sell the remaining locations. Here's what they said. The company has faced a series of challenges since the pandemic, including a drop in home sales and rising interest rates, which have contributed to a decline in consumer spending on home improvement projects. So it's not rocket science that these things are happening. So they're going to be closing 94 stores right away, right after this bankruptcy filing. Okay, so how many people are going to be losing jobs from there? Say, 10 people work at each one of those Lumber Liquidators stores. That's already 1,000 people that just lost their job, right? And now they have the remaining 300 stores that they're going to keep open for now, but that's just for now. That's until they can no longer keep them open. So the next step after that is those stores go under. And yet you keep hearing all these stories like it's really ramping up now, especially now that the stock market recovered recently. They're like, oh, what recession fear? What stock market crash? Everything is doing great, especially after this most recent inflation reading and the jobs reports and all this stuff. Like they are just completely hammering us right now with these fake news stories to the point where, it almost makes you believe things are going well, guys, because it's like, I look at it as like this shotgun blast approach, so many feel-good news stories, and it's like when you lie to yourself, right? When you lie to yourself so much, sometimes you end up believing those lies and believing that they're actually true when they're not. And I think that is the motivation right now with all these stories, especially running up to this election, in order to influence it one way or another, let's say. And of course, it's going to be easier to convince a certain group of people that the economy is doing well, especially after all these stories and reports, because if you're someone who's not suffering right now and you're still doing okay, you're hanging on, you have a little money in the bank, your investment portfolio is doing well, then you may easily fall for these lies that, hey, everything is really great. We don't have to worry about this recession. The only reason people like me are convinced that it's going to happen or is already happening is because I'm reviewing these stories and the data every day and month after month, and I've seen the deterioration. You've seen how many more people are getting laid off, how many more businesses are closing. You see how unaffordable housing still is and how the sales have fallen off a cliff, and 2024 will be the worst year with real estate sales ever and things like that. So you notice this stuff, but for the average person that's got a family and is going to work every day at their 9 to 5 and they don't have time to pay attention to all this stuff, might miss it. They might not notice it. The only thing that most people notice is how much higher the increase in cost of living has gone. That's what the average person notices right now, is that. Because nobody can deny that's not happening. But it's very easy for these people to look at these numbers and brush them off and say that, oh, it's nothing to worry about, it's only a subsection of the population that's not doing well, and everybody else has nothing to worry about. But just remember, that's exactly what they said last time, right before the huge recession we had in 2008 and the massive housing crash and the massive stock market crash and how much economic pain we felt back then. It was the same level of lying in the media back then as right now. And I feel like the fact that we're seeing so many of these feel-good news stories come out right now, especially after this stock market recovery, is actually a sign of how bad things really are, because there is no other strategy besides to deny it and try to convince everyone that the lie is true until the election is over. So please don't fall for the lies. You know, please do your own research, guys. Please continue to watch channels like mine for the most recent updates on what's really happening out there, to keep yourselves informed and don't get duped by these people. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.